I think you're hooked in.
All right. Well, first of all, good evening, everyone. And I'm happy to be here as opposed to me being in the Security Council, where I have to face a real enemy in spite of being supported by real friends next to me. I'm looking forward to this conversation, and I really encourage all of you to put questions. And even if you believe that your question may be banal or simple, nevertheless, go ahead and put a question. DNA is a very complex issue, and we know one European leader who made very controversial. We know one European leader who made, unfortunately, very controversial remarks about the purity of the nation, and it was not in the 30s, past century. It was like past week. DNA of the Ukrainians is very mixed historically. I already opened that secret that my son Ian, he insisted that I should take a DNA test. I believed he wanted me to disinherit him, but he was more concerned about my state of health, probably still hoping that I'm his source of material support. But anyway, my DNA.
When I talk about DNA, I don't
Right.
I don't mean it in a literal
Right.
sense, right? Yeah. So.
But Brian, nevertheless, I know what you mean, but
Okay.
I need to use it to explain the DNA of the Ukrainians. So my DNA is literally mixed, and it is as mixed as DNA of probably every Ukrainian. My DNA is partly Ukrainian, partly Polish, and partly Jewish. And that reflects on the history and on the geography. Ukrainians are certainly very distinct. They have the very distinct Ukrainian history, nature, body, and mind. But Ukraine is also the geography where many crossroads historically were not very simple. We were fighting at various parts of history with Turkey, with Russia, with Poland, with Lithuanians. We were part of the Polish and Lithuanian Duchy. We were part of many other alliances. In that respect, I think that Ukraine is the most American of all European nations. And I draw this parallel because the Americans built their nation as a free nation. You know, the other day I was just rereading for one particular reason the Gettysburg Address by Lincoln. And if you read it today and you replace the American geography with Ukraine, I think that what Lincoln said in 1863 is so pertinent to what is going on in Ukraine. Therefore, the nature of Ukrainians is very similar to the nature of this nation. And it is in our DNA to fight for freedom and liberty. And we will not be free as a nation until every Ukrainian is free. Well, thank you. I transitioned from purely bilateral work in Washington, D.C., where I spent 5 years from 2001 until 2006, to multilateralism in 2006. And ever since, I've been doing multilateral diplomacy. First as the director for international organizations, then as a vice minister for 6 years. I think it is a very challenging job because multilateralism, especially during the period of Trump administration, was in dire crisis. And even now it is still in crisis. Therefore, I have to fight two fronts, if I may. First of all, I have to do everything to advance the process of the occupation of Ukraine and bringing the war criminals to account. But on the second front, I have to defend multilateralism. The United Nations is not perceived positively. I just watched the testimonies of my colleague Linda, ambassador of the United States at the US Congress, where on July 20th she was defending what she does and what her government does in the United Nations. I face the same challenges. The United Nations has quite a toxic image, and not only in Ukraine. Partly it is because of the intrinsic failures of the design. Partly it is the failures of the United Nations, and partly we should really admit it because public should be educated about what the United Nations is and what the United Nations does. I mean, if I ask the an average citizen about the United Nations, he or she would almost automatically identify it with the Security Council. But with all the importance of the Security Council is just one pillar of the United Nations, but it has the highest profile, and most of the hype is around the Security Council. Well, thank you. I will start with March 27th of 2014. When myself and the acting foreign minister Deshitsa arrived in New York, and we went to the General Assembly and we put to a vote draft resolution on the territorial integrity. And you remember very well that we were very, very sincerely happy that we got 100 votes at that time. On the 2nd of March, 8 years thereafter, on 2022, we put to a vote a draft resolution on the aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine, and we got 141 votes. It in itself testifies the difference between 2014 and 2022. One may say, why not 193? But the membership of the General Assembly, it is basically the photo of the world, and you cannot Photoshop the world, and you cannot change Syria, you cannot change Nicaragua, you cannot change North Korea, and Russia still has its pool of cronies, about 25 countries in the General Assembly. In 2014, Ukraine was in shambles. Ukraine as a state, I mean. We practically had no army. We practically had no real Ukrainian government due to the infiltration of not only the Russian ideology, but Russian operatives in many sectors of the administration, let alone we used to have a defense minister who had Russian citizenship. Therefore, the reaction of the world was, I'm not justifying the reaction of the world, but the reaction of the world was also a photo of the objective realities on the ground. And even someone, even including in this audience, would say, why didn't you defend Crimea? Why didn't you defend Crimea with arms, with the army? We had no army. We had no army at that point. Yanukovych and his administration did everything possible to destroy the very structure of the Ukrainian armed forces. And should we start to defend the Crimean Peninsula the way we now defend Ukrainian territory in the east and in the south, we would fail absolutely. In 2014, the majority of the General Assembly saw it as incursion on the Ukrainian sovereignty. In 2022, the majority of the General Assembly sees this as a direct threat to their security. security in many dimensions. It may not be necessarily Russian tanks approaching Portugal or Russian fighters flying over Trinidad and Tobago, but it is certainly the whole complex of the issues of food security, energy security, financial markets, grain markets, you name it. There are many ambassadors, colleagues of mine, who would sincerely tell me, both in public and in private conversations, that they are frightened with the whole bunch of implications for their security. And some countries that are 10,000 miles away from Ukraine, they are thinking about how to support Ukraine without military involvement, because they would never have armies, they would never have the economic or financial potential of global nations. So the only way, at least in theory, they can defend themselves is to reinstall the respect of international law and order. Well, I would begin with what I have already mentioned when I spoke about the toxic image of the United Nations. I had multiple occasions to discuss this situation with my colleagues and with experts, and especially when I discuss it with the government officials or MPs of foreign countries, I remind them that it is our duty to explain to constituents why do we do what we do. It is our duty. It is the duty of the US government, and Linda, the US ambassador, she does a great job because she goes online, she meets people, she speaks at the US Congress, and she explains what we do and why we do that. It is our duty, once again, to tell to everyone, be it in New York or in Alabama, why the US government pays money and contributions and support the activities of the United Nations, because it is the duty of accountability. Of course, I mean, we would always have a percentage of people who, even being offered information, would still maintain the position that isolationism is the best choice for this country. But then we have to remind them of the period of history of the United States when the United States withdrew from many quarters of international global relationships, and what happened at the end. The return, the reintroduction of the United States in global politics resulted in triple price. You know, so coming back to the war on Ukraine, I mean, the Americans should be blessed that it is the Ukrainian soldiers who fight in the front, defending collective West, defending collective democracy, that it is not the American soldiers like it was the case in Afghanistan or wherever else. So, I mean, even speaking cynically from the point of view of the safety of US citizens, from the point of view of cost efficiency, I mean, it's an incredible thing that the Ukrainians proved to be worthy of sending arms and weapons and spending money on our security, you know, and I'm very grateful, and in spite of all the problems of the internal politics in this country, and by all means I would never interfere, I still believe in the strengths of the American system of democracy, and I have some doubts about the role of the Supreme Court in this country lately. But overall, the system of check and balances is still quite efficient. And we as Ukraine, as a nation, not we as a government, I mean, we as Ukraine, we enjoy bipartisan support, and it is a very valuable thing that the freedom and liberty of Ukraine enjoys bipartisan support on the Hill. Well, thank you. I think that Europe needs unity more than Ukraine needs European unity. I mean, we do need European unity, but for the sake of Europe and Europeans themselves, I mean, they need unity. European unity does not always and necessarily means robust action, because like consensus in the United Nations, consensus is the lowest possible denominator that allows approval of a decision, which does not mean that the decision is of high quality. It's just the lower standard that everyone agrees to. You know, so we have to distinguish between consensus and unanimity. And unanimity is what we need from Europe. And I think that in spite of the difficulties and in spite of millions, if not billions, that the Russians invested in propaganda and in covert operations, I still believe that Europe has enough wisdom to maintain its unity. I think that by now we have to abandon this naive hope that there is no collective responsibility of the Russian population for what's going on. I think that it will take ages to deputinize the Russian society. And what I tell now and then, and frequently so, the military defeat of Russia on Ukraine's territory is not the end. It is just an important stage in securing security, I'm so sorry to be, in Europe and globally. If we compare post-war Germany and Russia, post-war Germany underwent a very painful but important process of denazification. But Germany was occupied. Germany was occupied by the United States, the UK, France, and the Soviet Union. And the occupation by three nations allowed Germany to undergo the denazification, which resulted in Germany being one of the strongest democracies and economies. Even if we achieve, and we will achieve, military defeat of Russia on our territory, Russia will never be occupied. Never. Have no illusions. So the question is how we will achieve the Putinization of the Russian Federation, which is primarily about the Russians getting healthier when it comes to their perception about their own role and international relations. And there is no answer to that. Unfortunately, there is a very important number of countries around the world who cannot wait for a day where Russia is either militarily defeated or we sign of some kind of peace treaty with Russia, and then they will say, let's switch to the business as usual with Russia. If it happens, we will have another military conflict with Russia in 5 from 7 years from now, because they will do everything possible to build up a real army, not this phony army. They will hire all those degenerates and put in command proper military, and then we all will pay triple price compared to what we pay now. Well, basically, the position of the Ukrainian government has been that it's better to have diplomatic negotiations than to wage a war. But then the events of February 24 and everything that followed in the recent months put us in a position where we will deoccupy our territories. And we will not sit down and talk to the Russians to negotiate how Russians can keep our territories just for the sake of stopping the warfare. You know, if we sit down, from what I understand, talking to my leadership and discuss things with Russians, that will be how they withdraw their troops, how they will pay compensations for all the destruction, be it material or other forms of damage, and how the responsible for atrocities, war crimes, and crimes against humanity will be taken to account. In fact, this narrative about the need to have peace talks at any cost is basically the narrative of our opponents and of our enemies at the moment, because facing, if not defeat, then inability to achieve meaningful success in the battlefield, they are desperately seeking time to have a chance to improve their situation with the army, with the supply, and at the battlefield. Thank you. The issue of accountability is one of the most prominent themes that countries work at the United Nations. There is a group of friends of accountability established by almost 50 nations in the United Nations. So we discuss regularly how we may proceed, be it in New York, be it bilaterally, with the issue of accountability. Of course, there is ICC, the International Criminal Court, ICJ, but ICC, unfortunately, has no jurisdiction when it comes to crime of aggression. ICC is very helpful when it comes to the to responsibility of individuals, but not responsibility for the specific crime of aggression. Therefore, there is a very active group of nations who, including here in New York, be it inside the United Nations and outside the United Nations, they promote the idea of establishing a specialized tribunal for the crime of aggression that may cover not only the Ukrainian case, but for the future aggressions, God forbid they happen. If we do not bring to account the war criminals, that will allow this toxic mold to regrow, and then the whole system will be so corrupt and rotten from inside that we wouldn't be, even with the American or European support, to protect ourselves. Right, I cannot give monkeys about his health, and I don't wish him well, of course. But you know, the thing is that the removal, be it for natural or other reasons, of Putin from power does not mean that magically things will change 180 degrees. You know, it's total illusion. More than that, it is it has this potential of the danger that I've been telling you this evening several times, the whole system is so corrupt and so sick that basically it will be just a different shade of the evil. But unfortunately, it's going to be a very important challenge to the unity of the democratic collective world, because then it may result in a crack in that unity, because some people may say, all right, Putin is gone, let's deal with the new government. And I think we already, all of us, including the United States, we have already trusted Moscow too often to the detriment of global security. I mean, I always maintain the position that what happened in December 1991, when the Russian Federation was allowed to occupy the Soviet seat in the Security Council, in total violation of all the rules, be it the UN Charter itself, or be it the legal advice by the Legal Council of the United Nations, eventually resulted in too much trust. And I think that the trustworthiness of Russia is below zero. You know, so we can't really, well, whoever finds himself, I would say himself rather than herself in Russian realities, in Putin's chair, be it Naryshkin, be it Mishustin, be it whoever, he is not going to be dramatically different from what we are having right now. And then the population of Russia, as we just talked about, is so sick from the point of view of being so deeply brainwashed that they would not accept voluntarily any leader who will say, let's deoccupy Crimea, let's give back the territories, let's withdraw from Georgia, let's withdraw from Moldova, let's stop talking Washington what we've been telling Washington for decades. So we shouldn't have any illusions about that. We certainly need not a duplication, but we have to look at the model of the Marshall Plan. But you know, we are living in an entirely different reality in the 21st century. And I think that provided that there is security, the fact that the European Union granted Ukraine a status of a candidate country will have a significant impact on how the country is recovered and rebuilt. Because if the European leaders have wisdom and European business supports this wisdom, then it makes much more sense to invest in recovery of Ukraine, looking at Ukraine as a part of the European Union, because it guarantees the more predictability in the way you run your business, in the security of your investment, and then it's better to have the huge Ukrainian market not as appendix to the European Union, but as a part and parcel of the European space when it comes to trade, freedom of movement of money or human resources. So I think that the track of integration of Ukraine into the European Union is fundamentally important. And the deeper Ukraine is integrated in the European Union, the better for the North American business, because then the North American business is dealing with the part of the European Union that plays according to the rules that are well known and very predicted. So I think that the recovery will present a historic chance both to Ukraine and to the West. And I'm really looking forward to it. When we, in 1993, when I joined the MFA, I lived in Kansas and I moved to Ukraine, joined the MFA. We just had one computer at my floor of the MFA. We had to write everything, and then we had to bring it to the typing bureau, and nice ladies would type whatever you write, and then you take your draft to your superior, he crosses everything. Then you go back to the typing bureau and they retype it. It was total disaster. But then people were thinking very carefully what they write instead of copy-pasting. So when I came once from a typing bureau, I told one gentleman who later on became a foreign minister, I said, when in the world we all will have computers? And he said, the day we have computers, you will be so miserable. And I didn't believe him. And we are miserable. No, seriously, we are miserable because, believe it or not, there were times when a Ukrainian delegation, Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic delegation, would travel to the General Assembly, sailing off the port of Odessa all the way through the Mediterranean and Atlantic, and they would arrive in New York after weeks of sitting, smoking, drinking brandy, speaking about wonderful things, reading the records and rules of procedure, being very knowledgeable about everything. Now when you fly and before you land in JFK, you have 50 emails from your bosses, and you are not really even able to reply to them. The social media is the matter of fact. We cannot cancel it, and we have to adapt to it. But we have to adapt to it in a manner that would still allow you not to be hyped by 180 to 140. You have to be able to dedicate time to reading beyond a tweet. But as a matter of fact, we can't really cancel it, and we have to adapt to it. So I tried, and I think I've been very successful, to use it as a tool. And there were instances, I'm sure there are going to be instances in the future, where my last resort, dealing with, including the UN Secretariat, where I tell them, if you do not listen to me, I'm going to tweet it. And I do. First I do a very mild tweet, then I do harder version, and then I do a nasty tweet if they do not listen. And usually they listen. But it's amazing. It's an amazing thing, social media. And I think that it should be part of the academic curriculum for anyone who wants to be a successful foreign service officer and politician. I will give you just a framework answer. I mean, everything that happens in Ukraine and the Russian aggression on Ukraine has the most direct implications for the economic health of this world. It was already very bad, and the Russian aggression only made things worse. It is the responsibility of all of us, first of all, to acknowledge the reasons and not to be carried away by the Russian propaganda, like these days when Putin travels in Africa. Lavrov travels to Africa and he blames Ukraine for for the possible starvation. It has a direct impact. And Europe is about to face the worst winter probably since the end of the World War II in terms of the situation with energy resources and supply of gas and oil. But it is also an opportunity for Europe to finally make a break away from that poisonous dependency on Russian oil and gas. And if Europe is successful, I think that it will be the final nail in the Russian coffin. Right, yes. I have no doubts whatsoever, no matter who is elected and appointed the new British Prime Minister, the UK will stay on the right track. I mean, the UK as a nation is very solid in its ideological choice, and I think that nothing dramatically bad may happen with the change of the government. Of course, it was kind of disappointment to us for our national reasons that Boris Johnson had to resign, but once again it is an internal matter of the United Kingdom and of the British citizens to decide on the leadership of their government. Italian situation is more complicated, not because I have no doubts about the Italian democracy, and I was very much encouraged with the position of the Italian government in the course of the last 5 months, but the nature of the Italian politics is more complicated than the United Kingdom. So, and it's, I mean, you just look at the number of governments that they had in the course of the last 5 years. Well, it's a very good question. I mean, we really need to see how soon NATO will be ready to join Ukraine, because it is Ukraine. It is Ukraine that proved being militarily and in terms of determination able to fight what until very recently was branded as the second army in the world. You know, so I think that. The Ukrainian nation, the Ukrainian citizens, the Ukrainian soldiers and officers have already made a very clear case that if we are treated adequately, we are pure contribution to the European and global security. So I think that the North Atlantic Alliance will have no choice but to reconsider how to approach Ukraine. I've been asked the same question by one of the major US TV channels today, and I said, you know, I'm not a psychiatrist to deal with Putin's schizophrenia, you know. Everything he does is totally beyond common sense and logic, and the suicidal spiral of Putin is obvious. Nevertheless, this grain deal is at a very embryonic stage, and whether it will mature in something meaningful is yet to be seen, and literally within the next couple of weeks, you know. But the fact how blatantly Lavrov reacted to the accusation of hitting with missiles Odessa, you know, was incredibly sobering to many, including in Africa, I believe. And no matter what he says in Africa while visiting Africa, will not change the factual background of. But we are genuinely interested in the success of the initiative of the Secretary General. It is the initiative that resulted in signing of separate documents, because we signed a document with Turkey and the United Nations. We didn't sign anything with the Russian Federation because, as I said, Russia has a zero and below zero trustworthiness. We don't really trust in signing anything with them. So now the security of grain supply from the Ukrainian ports is basically also and significantly the responsibility of the government of Turkey and of the United Nations. The operational cell will be established literally starting probably from tomorrow, and we will see how they prepare the first convoy of ships loaded with Ukrainian grain. Well, I'm not really sure I got the question right, but I will just say simply, you know, we are all cells of the same body, you know, and if cell Ukraine dies in the body, it will have the most detrimental effect on all the body. So there is such an interdependency of global business and global community and Ukraine that it can't be underappreciated. There are countries that 50 and 70% dependent on Ukrainian food supply, you know, and we are all in the same boat.